Welcome to January 2nd. Our devotional today falls in Genesis chapter 3 and 4, Matthew, parts of chapter 2, parts of chapter 3, Psalm 2, and Proverbs 2. And, as we talked about yesterday, I love kind of how the One Year Bible does this when it has you read part of the Old Testament and part of the New Testament, because so many times they have beautiful parallels and really amazing aspects that speak towards one another. Now, the purpose of the Bible, we need to be very clear about this, is that the Old Testament points to Jesus, and the New Testament points to God's kingdom moving forward through the Messiah, through Jesus. And so we have to make sure that we account for the Old Testament when we read the New Testament and vice versa. We talked about this yesterday. But there's really a lot of beautiful things that happen when you are reading both of these together. And today is one of those days. If you look at Genesis chapter 3, remember we have just come and experienced the creation of the universe. And now Adam and Eve are hanging out in Eden, in this beautiful paradise. So technically it was Adam and woman. She didn't get the name Eve until chapter 3. But as we look at it, we really don't know how much time has passed, how much time Adam and Eve have spent in the garden. Now we can surmise and think about that it could have been a very long time. I mean, after all, remember Adam's job, he named the animals. That's a lot of animals. And, he was creating and cultivating and doing those things that God had commanded him to do. But we know that at some point, Adam and Eve came to the conclusion that they knew better. And that's what chapter 3 is about. We can blame Satan, we can blame the serpent all that we want, but ultimately the decision to sin was made by the man and the woman. And it wasn't one over the other. I know a lot of people say, well, Eve ate the fruit first. That doesn't matter. They both sinned. They are both equally culpable in this situation. I mean, Adam was standing right next to Eve when the serpent was talking, and he never once spent any time trying to interject or stop the serpent from talking and correcting things. So they both had equal sin in the situation. Regardless of that, though, this is what really kicks off the redemption plan for God. This is really what kicks off. And God makes a promise to Eve when she says that your offspring will strike the heel of the serpent. Now, Eve doesn't quite realize the significance of what has happened. Now, certainly she knows, hey, we've been kicked out of paradise. We're in this difficult situation. But I don't know that she fully understood. And the reason why I say this is because of the very first part of chapter 3, it says, in chapter 4, it says, Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. Now, the name Cain means, with the help of the Lord, I brought forth. Now, whenever God told Eve, hey, this is going to be, your offspring's going to strike the heel, Eve named her son Cain because she thought Cain was going to be this offspring, that Cain was going to be the one to strike the heel and to save them. And so she gave the name Cain. And this made it all the more horrible when Cain initiated the first murder and killed his brother out of jealousy, anger, envy. You insert sin, it's there more than likely when it comes to Cain and Abel. But this is a really stark contrast to when we're looking over here at Matthew, because Matthew is the introduction to the offspring, to the Messiah, to Christ. And this is a beautiful thing to look at and see that we've got this stark contrast of once again Eve trying to create a situation, to dictate the situation. In other words, she wanted to, yet again, be God, which is all of us. We all have this struggle. And so she was trying to say, hey, this offspring, this is the one that's going to save us. God's plan was very different. And so God, thousands of years later, finally brought forth the offspring that was going to strike the heel of Satan. And this is a beautiful thing. And our readings in Psalm today help to remind us that Psalm 2 is one of those messianic psalms. I want to read this to you. The Lord said to me in verse 7, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possessions. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. See, this is a messianic verse. This is one that's talking about the coming Messiah when it says, you are my son. And basically what God is doing here in this psalm is establishing the kingship of the Messiah. So not only was he going to be the striker of the snake and the eradicator of sin, he was also going to become the king, the Messiah. This is a beautiful compare and contrast and a reminder of what it is that Jesus did for us from the beginning of humanity to become the striker of the snake and the killer and the eradicator of sin that we can look forward to someday. Have a blessed day. We'll talk tomorrow.